at the center of Penn's campus in the fall, a student was assaulted, not sexually assaulted, just physically assaulted by a person in the frat with a lot of bystanders. And there was no response from the administration. You know, there was a group of students protesting, and I thought it was irresponsible for the administration not to at least acknowledge that students are scared right now and that they have a responsibility to foster a safe culture rather than one that tolerates fear.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Distinguished Figures. Today, we're going to discuss a much debated topic, gentrification. And is it systemic injustice or necessary for progression? Here to join us in answering that question is Jack Starobin, an ally of the UC Townhomes movement here in Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us, Jack.
Thanks for having me, Timethius.
Yes. So gentrification is actually not something I'm too familiar with myself. Like I hear it here and there, but it's actually not a conversation I really participate in. I really just don't know anything about it. So I'm hoping you could like sort of steer me in a direction at the end of this conversation. But yeah, let's just hop right on into it. Ready?
Let's do it.
That's awesome. So like the UC Townhomes movement, what is it? What's going on?
Sure. The UC Townhomes recently renamed the People's Townhomes following our encampment and occupation of of Brett Altman's space, is a protest movement led by residents of the UC Townhomes, the People's Townhomes, which is an affordable housing development 2 blocks off Penn's main undergrad campus, uh, for very low income residents, predominantly black working class families. It's been there for about 40 years and there's about 400 residents. They are facing an imminent threat of eviction and displacement by a developer who plans to sell the property and a city that won't intervene to stop the sale.
Sure. Okay, before we get into that, like tell us more about you. Like where are you from? What's your upbringing like?
Sure. So I'm from Olney, Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland. I grew up in that's a suburb out. I grew up in a suburb about an hour outside DC.
Okay.
Uh, my grandmother's lived with us since I was in third grade. I have a younger brother, uh, and yeah. So I grew up in that suburb. I went to public school in the area from kindergarten to eighth grade. It's a relatively high performing school district. So compared to the rest of the U.S. education system, I was privileged. Uh, with that said, I found my educational experience in a personal sense to be very frustrating and dissatisfying. Happy to get into that. Um,
What do you mean
and
by
so,
that?
what do I mean by that? Sure. So I'm gonna start talking about things that are like really broad national concerns, but
Okay.
teaching to the test, an era of complacency of being at school, not to learn about things because you care about them or because they matter to you, not to learn about how to realize your values in your life and in the world around you, but just to get it done as like mindless tasks. That's was intrinsic in my public school experience. I recognize that asking for more than that is already like a privileged place to be, but I also think that education needs to be a place where students can go to figure out what matters to them and how they want to realize those values in their lives and in the world they live in. And things that fall short of that, like teaching to the test, mindless worksheets, teachers who do not want to be there, partially because they're like systemically underpaid. Like,
Right.
this is really bad stuff. Another one I'll just throw out is I went to a gifted and talented program in fourth and fifth grade. They bused me across my school district to a school with like comparatively lower performing test takers. It was a great program for me, but it wasn't accessible to the students who lived in the neighborhood of that school, and I think that's a really big problem. The school in my neighborhood was slightly more well resourced, slightly whiter, and had a real culture problem. My middle school, in terms of rhetoric that was thrown around by students and tolerated by teachers. So there are a need and room for improvement in my school experience.
So like did you were you in going to school, like public school, did get the program pass elementary school, like what happened after?
Sure. So that gifted and talented program changed my life. It was an incredible experience socially, academically. I went to the middle school that was near my house. That's really where my activism started,
Middle
which we can
school.
talk about later. Middle school, yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I can get into more into that. But I
Space.
do. Oh, right now. Okay, sure. Yeah. Uh, I mentioned a culture problem. So the middle school I went to was about, I want to say, 50 or 60% white,
Okay.
which was higher than my school district, which is only about 33% white right now. But so there's discrepancies within the district. But I was really involved in the newspaper, and I just called out the school for having a problem of like intolerance and racism accepted among the student body, the way like just the standard jokes in the cafeteria, people throwing around like the F slur with regards to the queer community, like casually. I think like that's pretty common, unfortunately, in like public schools in suburban America, but just because it's common doesn't mean it should be tolerated. So I called it out. And then I did some work with my principal uh, in terms of starting to like organize students around like, can we as students organize initiatives that like force this conversation rather than just accepting it as like a social norm. Certainly like helped me build some skills and gain some awareness of where I was, how to start making change. But then in high school, I went to through a kind of serendipitous chain of events. I left my public school district and went to Middlesex School, which is a boarding school in New England. Uh, Much wealthier, much more socioculturally like elite and elitist, much whiter space.
I was reading and I read that Middlesex, like I was reading the wiki page and it said there was only like 30% people of color and 35% people in financial aid. That's like less diverse than a lot of the predominantly white universities. That's like it's a big hop, even from what you just described your previous school experiences. Like how I can't imagine that personally.
Yeah, well, I could not imagine it either. Uh, there, so like I said, relatively affluent suburb. There's no culture of boarding school where I grew up, uh, and like you just said, this is by far like the wealthiest and the whitest space I've ever been in when I hop here. So there was by every measure serious culture shock that I was dealing with.
Okay.
Yeah, it was hard to wrap my head around.
For sure. Like, what was your initial like reaction, and like where
Yeah.
do you go from there in the place like that? Like, how do you started activism in middle school, which first of all I can't even imagine. Coming from where I came from, it's difficult, but also it's just not intuitive to get involved that young, right? But like then you go to this high school, it's even more division. It's a boarding school too, so it's like you're staying together, right? So it's like 24/7. Like,
Yes.
what do you even do from there?
In terms of like activism, is that
Yeah,
what you're?
part of life. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'll speak more generally first. I grew a lot in that space at Middlesex, and I personally feel like it changed my life in a great way.
Mm,
And I had a great experience. There were challenges. I don't know if all my peers feel the same way, and that's
okay.
okay. But I will say that you're always on because it's a boarding school. So, like you said, it's 24/7 with your peers. Your teachers are your dorm parents, are your coaches. So you're always like forced to be your best self, or at least a self worthy of the people you're sharing community with. And so that that's like a constant pressure, and it's really hard to adapt because like yeah, in middle school, like I don't know, I had a problem with raising my voice, and my brother, like like in seventh grade, it's like an important thing for me to work past, like in terms of growing up. But like you're forced to do it when you're at boarding school because you're around your peers all the time. Uh, in terms of activism, I bring that point up just to say that like in the townhomes organizing, it's exactly the same thing where like when you're in community with people, you always need to remember that their lives don't stop when you're having a bad day. And so you have to be ready to be present and to be a full and good listener uh, all the time. That's part of the work. And that's something that I learned at Middlesex. Uh, but it's not where the action is happening, so to speak. what I mean by that is Concord, Massachusetts, which is where my school was, is a wealthy, predominantly white suburban place of Boston. Uh,
Yeah, there's a lot of boxes there. Okay.
a lot of boxes there, a lot of complicity in that community, a lot of benefit from like systems of like wealth segregation by race and other things like that. So by all means, like beneficiaries of like white supremacist norms. But
Okay.
in Philadelphia, you can see the segregation. In Concord, Massachusetts, like we just said, there's like 30% of the school is students of color.
Mm.
And if you leave the school, which is only 400 students, there's not that many other people of color there.
Okay, that's like giving me Get Out vibes, but go on.
It's Get Out vibes sometimes, lots of the time. It's Get Out vibe. And so, like there's a distance between the people most directly affected by issues of systemic racism that I and some of my peers are really earnest about changing. But there's a distance between the people living it and us, the supporters who want to support, but I don't know it firsthand.
Mm.
Uh, and so literally you would have to travel like to Boston if you wanted to like like there are other ways to do activism, but like there's a greater distance between supporters and where the crisis is most visible. And I think where the crises are most visible is often where it's easiest to like insert yourself as an early supporter. Um, yeah,
So you think it was easier after high school
yeah,
than, you know?
absolutely. I mean, I will say that there was lots of work that my peers of color did, and there were lots of things that I was involved in at the school to try to change school culture.
Like what?
Sure. I'll speak briefly to the fact that while I was at my year at Middlesex was the most diverse racially and ethnically in the school's history. I think partially because some of the admissions officers, one in particular, overspent our financial aid budget.
One in
Uh,
particular?
uh, she's the best. Um, but the presence of the affinity group MX Fam at while I was at school,
Yes, fam. So
uh, that that's what the affinity group was called, MX Fam.
it's not an acronym, it's just MX fam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, I think it's not an acronym.
The Middlesex fam, is that what it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. But the point being that that affinity group literally just had more members than ever before. So there were conversations that my peers of color centered and like forced to the table. They held their own events. One friend of mine, uh, like did a photography project where he like took like collaborated with each member of the affinity group to take a stylized portrait of them, and like it was a collaborative work within that group. I like can't speak to it on the way that he can, of course, but my point is there were conversations that they forced to the table. uh for me personally, the way that I hung on to like issues of racial justice and other forms of like socioeconomic injustice was by just trying to show up, guest speakers, those events. That's how it was. But I was not like in the community in terms of like having personal relationships with people most directly facing crises of gentrification where they were being gentrified, because like I said, there's a physical distance between where I was in what's often referred to as the bubble of campus and I guess Boston, which is the nearest urban center, really wrestling with this issue on like a dire and immediate and
Mhm.
visible level.
Like gentrification was a focus for you even in high school, right? But like you said, more difficult. I wasn't even aware that it existed in high school, to be honest. Like, so like what was the I guess I'm wondering what was the shift? Like what's different? Now I think you kind of mentioned it briefly, but like how did that how did you realize that difference? Like how did you get started with UC Townhomes?
Sure. So let me be clear. I did not feel like I really knew what gentrification was in high school.
Okay.
Um, and I definitely like the first crash course I got in gentrification was from some of my peers at that boarding school who came from cities like Chicago and New York, from which I don't live there, and like introduced me to what it was. Uh, but I came to Penn wanting to understand like what's gentrification because I keep hearing my peers talk about it and it sounds like it's really a problem. Uh, but like, what is it? Uh, One of the questions for me was, you know, okay, so like for example, my family like pays a mortgage on a house,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and if the value of our house goes up, that's good for us,
Mm-hmm.
right? Uh, and if the value of our neighbors' houses go up, that's also good for us because our the value of our house goes up.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right.
and so my question was, I understand that gentrification is like I didn't quite understand how literally it affected people because I was like, isn't it just wealth accumulation in a city? What's wrong with like I would hope that property values increase, which is what in the I would hope that property values increase because that sounds like a community accumulating wealth. The UC townhomes I heard about initially like gentrification was a buzzword that was thrown around, but another word that was thrown around was displacement. And
Mm-hmm.
displacement is very easy for me to understand why that's uh, a crisis of human rights and human dignity on every level. Uh, you have a home, you forced out. And I don't know what that means on a personal level, but I can understand why that's upsetting. Uh, I think displacement is a pretty big theme in Judaism. I'm Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother's grandmother came here fleeing pogroms in Russia. Displacement sucks. Uh, and what became clear to me was these are renters. They don't own their homes like I do or my neighbors do in this suburb. So when the property value goes up for the UC townhomes to a selling price of $100 million, only one guy, Brett Altman, stands to profit from that. The 400 people who've lived there for the past 40 years are renters. They don't have equity that has gained value. So they're forced out, and only one person benefits from this. That's not wealth accumulation for people who live there. It's wealth accumulation for a disconnected property owner.
Right.
That's the problem with gentrification, part of it.
So you think that's like the line between gentrification and simple? Like, is it still gentrification even if they're homeowners that are benefiting from it, or is it like the displacement that makes a difference?
No, it's still gentrification. If you know, like if the property values in where you live are skyrocketing, it's
Mm,
it's gentrification. Uh, when specifically what's happening is property values are increasing, and so you have investment into the area. The problem is when the people investing or reinvesting into the area are not the same people who are there right now.
okay.
Uh, and so then one community, in this case, like this group of 400 Black working class residents, is the people who live there right now. And the people reinvesting in the area will cater to the interests of predominantly white or non-black Penn students and Drexel students
Mm,
and corporate interests from University City that will outprice the very residents who live there right now. They will offer amenities that are probably too expensive for someone making the kind of money that a low-income resident might make. Uh, so you're destroying a home. You're displacing a home.
right.
If gentrification were to happen, but the people who are like buying up property are the people who live there, like I want to start a small business down the block from where I live, and I'm going to employ all of the people who are like my neighbors.
Mm,
Now, like I don't know, that's a conversation that I'd be interested in having with whoever's, trying to do that kind of project, but that's not the kind of project we're seeing in cities across the country.
right. No, it's okay. So gentrification in and of itself isn't necessarily negative, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit semantic, but
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Because like actually I was talking to someone about that some months ago. Like me not knowing much about it, I only heard it about it in negative concepts. So like to me, gentrification was synonymous with displacement, right?
Right.
Some therapists they told me they had saw some studies that showed like gentrification could actually help communities. It didn't give me any further like context than that. But I heard that and I was like, hmm, like what does that mean? And I looked at those studies and it was showing that gentrification could like actually increase diversity with new people moving in, increase inclusion, um, but also like I guess to the point of like increasing the value of the community itself. I think something else that I read about that was like gentrification could make people more likely to stay in the community just because it's improving. Um, versus I'm not sure what the state would be before that, but like I'm assuming gentrification is improving the community, right? So that's like a separate thing, like than what's happening with UC townhomes, right?
Right.
Gotcha. Okay, this is a very helpful clarification because like I was, you a lot of words, especially in certain social justice spaces, like you only hear them in one context. So like if you hear them in different contexts, it sort of just creates this sort of what's the word for it? Like
Echo
um
chamber.
sort of it's confusing, So like thank you. Like that was very helpful. Like because I wasn't entirely sure what the distinction was between those two things, right?
For sure.
Okay. So like how did you hear about UC? Like we're both Penn students, both went in sort of I guess different directions when it comes to social justice. I didn't know about UC Townhomes until like the past couple of months. So like how did you like just like sort of stumble into that? Did you like look for it or what was happening there?
Sure. So I initially got involved with like protesting the assault that happened at Castle. Uh,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
wealthy frat at the center of Penn's campus in the fall. A student was assaulted, uh, not sexually assaulted, just physically assaulted by a person in the frat with a lot of bystanders. Um, and there was no response from the administration. There was a group of students protesting, and I thought it was irresponsible for the administration not to at least acknowledge that students are scared right now and that they have a responsibility to foster a safe culture rather than one that tolerates fear. Uh, but after that protest, it was clear to me that like, okay, uh, this administration needs more of like a forceful touch to get them to move and like, yeah.
Okay.
Uh, So I finished out that semester. It was a hard semester for me, just academically speaking. And over winter break, I was like, when I come back, I want to be more involved in activism on campus, because it just feels like a thing that Penn needs to be like its best self.
Okay, thank you for sharing that though. I want to wrap up with a question as a, you know, in some ways a more serious question. So I want to, forewarn you about this question, right? Just keep an open mind and let me know if you have to not respond. Okay. Okay. So, Jack, what what's your favorite dessert?
You gassed up that question so much, bro. Uh, okay, you want the real answer?
Uh-huh.
Flan.
Flan.
Yeah,
What's your favorite?
yeah.
I'm not judging you open publicly, but when the camera's not recording, I'm gonna
What's
okay.
wrong with flan, bro?
Texture. I'm a texture person. The texture is
Hey,
just mm.
flan has such a distinct texture.
It's like tofu, but worse. Not only the texture of tofu. That's why I don't like tofu.
It's like Jello, but better. But Jello's trash, so
Okay. Okay. Those I was about to say some very controversial things on air, and I can't do that legally, I suppose. But okay. All right. Okay. Flan. Flan. We're gonna roll with that. We're gonna roll with flan.
Mm.
Okay. Well, Jack, thank you for joining us. And thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of Distinguished Figures, you could find more information about the UC Townhomes Coalition, their actions, the movement, gentrification in general, and how to learn more about what Jack and the group is doing down in the description below. While that said, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Bye.